All right, welcome into another episode of Debate Night. I'm back this week. No more of the Hunter hierarchy. In fact, he's not even here at all today. He's gone. We just removed him entirely. Now he's on vacation. But we're back and we are joined by a great cast today. We've got Brody Smith live from Jonesboro.
Yeah, very cold here.
Very cold. We got Robbie joining us again, another returning champion.
It's not cold here, but I'm inside my house. So
Jonah is joining us again today.
Trevor and I are both rocking the backwards hat. Maybe that's a good omen for
That
me.
is true. Good vibes. And then Steven, all the way from West Coast time.
Yeah, I'm hoping that Prodigy can power me to a victory today.
I mean, so far it's been trending that way for them. At least on the course. We'll see what happens in the courts. Am I right? There we go.
Ooh,
All right. Well, we're gonna go ahead and kick it right off. We're gonna talk a lot of Champions Cup today, a few other topics, but we're gonna, we had a major, so we're gonna stick to it pretty good today, and we're gonna start with kind of the main storyline of the Champions Cup, which is that both Kristen and Isaac turned in wire-to-wire dominant performances to win the Champions Cup without any real drama. Fair to say. Did this major fall flat due to that, or were the performances from those individuals enough to hold interest? What do you think about the balance between that kind of situation, Brody?
It's an interesting one for sure because I think there are some people that really like to watch the dominance aspect of sports, right? When someone is just so much better and is having an incredible performance. I think some people are drawn to that and they want to just see it continue and see just how how far that the athlete can push themselves. But I think there's also the other side that want to see the drama. They want to see the competition. They want to see the back and forth. And that's the one thing that we didn't really get because going into Sunday, it was pretty clear to everyone that both Isaac and Kristen were going to win, especially Kristen. Isaac, a little bit more potential for something to happen, but yeah, I don't know. I think if you are looking for that drama, it wasn't there this year. But if you like to just watch pure and utter dominance, that's what you got.
Yeah, definitely. It does go both ways a bit. Robbie, what do you think?
yeah, I think the rub, and we'll get to this a little bit later, was that we walked into Sunday with the potential for drama being so dramatically low. Dominance has one factor, but I think we can even go back to European Open last year where we had a huge amount of dominance between Paul and Eagle, but it was Paul and Eagle both fighting. So there was that drama, there was that storyline at the top. We're basically walking in as a fan hoping someone's going to play poorly from the lead card. And I don't think that any time that we're walking in expecting poor performance out of someone that we're in a good situation. I do think in terms of Kristen, we at least had the exciting storyline through most of her tournament where it was like, oh, hey, she's playing, like the par train is still going. She still has those pars. But we also like had to get creative in doing that. So, but the biggest rub was not only do we not have any drama, but like if you want to tune into no drama, you also can't see the shots.
Very good point. Jonah, what did you think about the event?
So yeah, I think it's gonna take a double-edged approach here. For MPO, definitely not enough interest. Just for the dominant performance, I think that there's definitely like the field's too big now for there to be, and too talented for there to be like a one guy, kind of dominating a whole tournament. That being said, like one storyline from the MPO division that this tournament did bring back was that backhand dominant players are still have a sport at the top level of this game. I mean, obviously Isaac Robinson, but like, look who else finished at the top this week. Who else do I have here? Virtually forehandless Eagle came in tied for second. James Conrad was a top 15 finisher. Niklas Antala, who's primarily backhand player, threw a few forehands out there, but mainly backhand. Matteo, and even my fellow lefty Chris Clemens with that dominant forehand of his. So that's kind of like the storyline, I think, coming out of this event is that backhand dominant players can still make it and can still win a major, especially because we have two of them on the East Coast this year. That's definitely a big storyline over there. And then with the FEO, I do agree with Brody that having a dominant force like Kristen keeps the women's game on a level playing field in terms of viewership. Like I'm surprised no one said this yet, but Kristen won by 14 strokes, which is the largest margin of victory in a FPO field of greater than 30. And I have a feeling that this 2023 season for Kristen is going to go down as an equivalent to a 2015 Paul McBeth season. And that's why this performance is a part of a bigger storyline that I think everybody, not just FPO fans, all disc golf fans, are going to follow for the whole year. And I mean, like when you think about it, bottom line, like in women's sports, there's very few like competitive like groups that come in, week out and have a dominant performance. I'm thinking like Serena Williams in tennis for all those years. She, had, I think it was like over 20 major wins and stuff like that. And I think Kristen's finally taking on the role of like being a superstar in the sport and being a role model for young players and things like that. So the stars make the sports that we all play in. And I think Kristen's doing that for FPO right now.
That's a valid point. It's interesting what you mentioned about the backhand players. I wasn't really tracking that, but there is something to be said about, especially in women's sports, we have seen like the stars elevate women's sports to a new level, like Serena Williams, like you mentioned. In soccer, there's been quite a few different examples, even basketball. Like certain players are able to kind of transcend. We've actually just recently seen that with Caitlin Clark from Iowa in college basketball. Huge media presence, and that is somebody who's able to transcend that barrier of men's and women's sports and just like really take on a role in the media. So that there's something to be said for that, like that kind of factor with everything. Steven, what did you think about everything?
So going last is tough, obviously, because there's lots of good points that have been made. But for me personally, and I take this viewpoint a lot as the viewer because I do watch pretty much all the live disc golf I can, it fell flat. Consensus is probably more in the middle. Everybody loves a dominant player. I love a dominant player. Dominant athletes are great in their time. But the thing that, for me, from a viewing standpoint, from the broadcast, DGN is still working out their ability to tell stories other than the leader. And so when you have a dominant leader, the DGN broadcast is kind of stuck because they don't have at this point in time, the technology to go and film the people that are fighting for cash. And they started to tell that story a little bit, but we lose that when you're watching the live broadcast. And so when you have a major and something so important, you want to tell that story, not just for the people at the top, but you want to tell that story for everybody and how important it is for these people that are fighting for cash and fighting for placement, fighting for points. And I don't think that right now they do a good enough job of that. And so when you don't have that and you have blowout leaders, you're missing all the drama. People tune into sports for drama, dramatic, and epic endings and all these types of things. And so hopefully at some point, DGN will make that leap and jump up to that next step of being able to be that storyteller to really keep us engaged when you have a dominant performance like this.
Really good point. Really good point. I think that's a huge thing. Like, I'm sure they were probably feeling like very stuck knowing that they were going to the last day and they had to come up with every story basically. I think they were basically gifted that Silas Schultz run because at least that gave them something. And I think Robbie said it best probably in the fact that when you're going into the last day, and I felt the same way where it was like, I'm hoping somebody implodes today. Like, not even hoping, like, I love Isaac Robinson. I think he's fantastic. I'm so happy for him. But as a fan, you want to see drama. When Silas started creeping up, I was like, oh man, if Isaac just takes a double here, we are really going to be, in the thick of it. And like, so like when that's when what you're hoping for going into the day, you kind of know things are flat. So I think that's definitely how things were. But at least, there were dominant performances by somebody. It's not like people were throwing it away or anything. So we always have that. Headed into the next round, Brody currently at 2 points, along with Jonah, Robbie, and Steven tied at 3. This was kind of a topic that's been talked about a bit. I don't feel like this got mentioned a whole lot last year. It might have, but I know this year it was talked about a ton. And that was kind of W.R. Jackson as a course was kind of put on blast a little bit by some people. There's not really any OB there. It's very few instances. That's very different than the rest of the Pro Tour where OB is so prevalent. It's definitely more of an old school course that we've kind of inserted back into this new tour. And, there were people shredding it. Obviously Isaac Robinson was able to really pull away without much issue on it. So the question here is WR Jackson too soft without the presence of much OB? Can the course be changed without ruining its essence, kind of like what it really is meant to be? Or should a new one be considered? Robbie, what do you think?
So first off, bummer for the three of us that have to go before the pro player who actually played the course talking about if it's too soft or not, because the internet has all the opinions. But when it comes to was the course too soft, out of a field of 108 people, 49 people still took OB strokes. So you can tell me that there wasn't OB on the course, but literally half the field basically took OB at one point or another. So there definitely was OB out there, and it was well placed where it was in terms of trying to create some separation. But I think really when I'm like the big argument that was made the whole time, and they kept trying to highlight it in the press conference, well, you get to scramble. I'm going to come from the perspective of someone who actually creates content and tries to put disc golf on film for the viewers, which is where we need to be thinking about. And if you really want to see good scrambling, you never actually get to translate it to camera, because you either can't see the player when they're really in such a tough like space to actually be able to throw out of those places, or if they're in what seems like a tough scramble from the player's perspective, you're like, oh, well, it's just an easy pitch out from there. So tough places to scramble don't translate well to camera. So I don't think there's an appreciation for it in adding that element back to the game. So anyone that wants to call WR Jackson soft, congratulations. I don't think you've ever played there before, because I do not think it plays soft. Just look at the field.
I will say the stat that they were throwing up there, Robbie, to counter you was, I believe it was like less than 60 OB strokes in all of 2022. And during the final round of the Blue Ridge Championship, there were 660 strokes of out of bounds. Now, very extreme example being that course, but that was like how dramatic we went from like that course to this one, where it was so different. But I see your point. You know, the scrambling point, very excellent. That is a very true statement. Jonah, what do you think? Too soft?
I mean, the biggest argument I have, and I'm not sure if this answers the question, is that the property isn't the problem. Especially because now that we're building history around the event at that location, regardless of if it's like the same course year to year. I mean, I think making changes year to year is definitely going to make it interesting coming back there every year. I mean, you see the same thing at Winthrop every year. They make some changes. But I think, I mean, like, let's look at the stats here, right? Averaging 10 under around to win a 4-round tournament is where our sport's at right now, if you think about it. Isaac Robinson shot 40 under. I mean, granted, he laid up for bogey on, what was it, 18 right at the end. But I mean, come on, like averaging 10 under to win a major, like that's kind of where our sport's at right now. And I mean, think about it. We haven't played a 4-round event since Vegas. And like, that's why some of the scores have not been as high as that. And we also have had awful weather at every single other event this season. Brody can probably attest to that. Whether it be wind, cold, wet, mixture of all three. You know, the conditions have not been conducive to scoring on the Pro Tour events so far this season. And I think somebody said, I think maybe Charlie Eisenhunt on the FPO coverage said, this is like the best disc golf weekend you could ask for, like sunny, you know, relatively dry, you know, nothing too sketchy in terms of the weather. And I think that WR Jackson does challenge the players in a unique way, and it provides its own style of golf, different than like in a Charlotte course or a Smuggler's Notch or anything like that. It does have its own unique feel, and I think there are certain players that do have an advantage at those courses, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily a weak just because we're seeing hot scores out there. I think that it should take, you know, an aggressive play style to go out there and win a major. So I think that's where our sport's at right now, is averaging 10 under around to win a major.
Yeah, that's completely fair. Steven, do you agree?
No, and I'm not going to agree with Robbie either. For me as a viewer, right, and again, I'm going to keep taking that standpoint. For as a viewer, I think that the course is too soft when it comes to scoring. I'm not a huge fan of 10 down over a 4-round tournament. I mean, we saw that with European Open too, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure the Beast has a decent amount of OB out there. So I don't know if the OB is necessarily going to be the cure for that. but OB definitely helps, I think, when it's placed carefully, obviously to punish bad shots. A couple of spots on this course where a terrible shot, and at least this is what I heard in the broadcast, it kind of opens up a second unintended fairway. That should really never happen on a course. If you have a shot that terrible where you're like, oh, I have a brand new line over here, I'm gonna take that. I'm not a big fan of that as a viewer. I want to see good shots. I want to see what they're intending to do, and when they're not intending to do something, I want to see them be punished for it. I think also maybe potentially changing pin positions throughout the tournament could help that course, give the players a different challenge as the major goes on. We don't really have that anywhere in the disc golf world currently. And I think for a major, taking that opportunity in a 4-round tournament for 2 of the days to have different pin positions when you're playing the same course for 4 days in a row, I think could really challenge players in a different way and open things up to potentially more scoring separation.
Yeah, that is a really good point. I think in woods golf and at WR, because WR, I feel like the rough is actually pretty cleared out. A lot of bad shots end up in decent places, and I think that is a big part of the thing. Brody, you were there. What do you think?
I've got so much on this, so I might go over my time. Okay, so we talked about that a lot with a lot of the pros about this course. Because the first thing is, does winning 40 under feel like a major score? Like, as a fan, do some people feel like that is a score? Because let's be honest, Isaac maybe made 6 bad throws all week.
Yeah.
So changing the course a little bit might not even change the impact of like how much he would have won by. He might have even won by more, but instead of 40 under, it might have been 20 under or something. 10 under a round is going to be really hard for someone to actually make a comeback. That's the first thing.
Mhm.
If we would have taken this field, the score, the leaderboard, and dropped it at Blue Ridge last week, and you're saying Isaac has that lead going into Sunday, are we still thinking the same thing of, oh man, we need Isaac to play really bad? No, like Isaac could just have an off day, not play really bad, just have an off day, and those 6 shots could be gone in the last 3 holes. USDGC is another. You think that's enough? You think Isaac feels good about his lead going into USDGC on the final day? I don't think so, but this course, I think he did. Robbie talked about OB a little bit. The only 2 holes that OB ever came into play was holes 16 and 18. And 18 was really the only hole that course management actually came into play. This course is all gas. Aggressive. You get off the fairway, you're literally trying to throw a roller as far up as far as you can. 18 was the only hole I ever saw, and I was playing again at the bottom of the field with people that are just playing for nothing, so they're just going nuts, right? 18 was the only hole I ever saw on coverage and people I were playing with that people actually had to lay up and like pitch out and do course management. Why? Because there was actually OB around the green. You couldn't just chuck a shot up there. You actually had to place it. That was a great. Who had the scrambling point? That was a fantastic. Yeah, Robbie. Great, fantastic point. A lot of times, even if we do see them and we see the shot, the angle isn't actually from their vantage point, so we can't even see what kind of gap they hit. We can't see anything about how difficult that shot is. That's a big one that's kind of hurting. All right, couple ideas. Hazards on a certain side of the fairway. So you're forcing people, okay, if I go left here, I'm in the hazard, so I need to miss right and make the miss right on that hole the worst spot to be in to scramble. You could do that to kind of make it a little bit more difficult because, again, this goes back to 17 at USDGC, not a difficult hole, but the idea of stroke and distance on 17 at USDGC makes it a difficult hole. So now if Isaac steps up to hole 1 Sunday at the major and the whole left side is hazard, that's going to put a little bit more thought in his head when he throws than right now. If he throws a bad shot, he's like, oh, I can just scramble and save par. I think removing course management, removing that element of having to think how to play the course and how to play certain shots and when to be aggressive and when not to be aggressive, that removes a huge element of stress, a huge element of just the game of disc golf. And I think that's where you just see this week was my argument of we were playing darts out there. Whoever had the best backhand and whoever had the best putt won the tournament. and that was Isaac Robinson. He was by far the best at throwing the backhand and was by far the best at putting, and he won. So to me,
Is that a bad thing though? Like, I don't mean to
that's
jump
a good
in
question, because you were talking about like this. That is what disc golf is, and if that is what disc golf is, and that is what people want to see, they just want to see who is the best at throwing the shot, and they don't want to see anyone have to think or make decisions. Because going back to Steven's point, if you look at hole 17, for example, they showed his drive all 4 rounds. It was literally the same shot. And if you did that on a lot of holes, literally the same shot. And that goes back to my thing of, if you can't change the course, if you can't change tee pads, if you can't change pin placements, if you can't make it to where now instead of hole 2 being like a pushing hyzer, now hole 2 is like a sidearm from a different tee pad, or the pins in a different spot, and now it's a sidearm. You literally are just having someone, because that's the other thing. Who made the point about the backhand players not being dead?
that was me, yeah.
Jonah, yeah.
There were 2 forehand holes. Every other shot was either a pushing hyzer or a turnover backhand. So if you have that shot dialed, look at the leaderboard. James Conrad, Mason Ford, Isaac Robinson. These guys have that shot dialed. And so like, that's just the question I guess we have to answer as, fans and spectators is, do we enjoy watching? And that's,
I
that's,
think
that kind of goes back to our first question with the drama is like,
well, I think the point is, when you have a course like WR that's going to play the same every single time.
Yep.
And like kind of to your point, Brody, what happens is when a guy like Isaac gets rolling, you kind of already can see the writing on the wall. Like, what's going, and like that was kind of the same for everybody towards the top of the leaderboard. Like, that leaderboard didn't jumble around a ton. You saw those guys at the top, Silas Schultz, James Conner, Mason Ford, kind of stick around most of the event because, like you mentioned, I do agree that not having, any trouble, that scrambling was, like you said, very much you get in the woods. I'm just throwing it as far up the fairway as I can, and I'm going to get up and down for par because the greens aren't protected. There's no OB to worry about on almost every hole. I do think that, I don't know, it's not the style of disc golf that I really would like to watch. I like to see decisions made, because think of how much more of like a talking point that becomes when we're at Vegas and it's the playoff and it's like, oh, Drew Gibson laid up. Was that the right move? I mean, it feels like almost every other event this year, we've been talking about somebody who laid up or made a crucial decision that led to a certain event. It's like the Kevin Jones versus Calvin thing early in the year. Like, it's such a big part of the sport. So it's weird to go into this event and then it just be absent. Basically.
And just to add that real quick is, when you're under extreme pressure, and you're as good as Isaac is, to where his backhand is one of the more consistent backhands I've ever seen in the woods, and his putt is one of the more consistent putts when he's feeling it.
Yeah.
When you're under that extreme pressure, it's really easy for him just to continue that going.
Right.
And not,
that's
if he never has to think.
Yeah,
right? He's never stepping up to a tee pad being like, what should I do today?
Yeah.
It's this shot is the only shot. When you now start adding elements of decision making, and we had a whole podcast talking about Bradley Williams, right? We had a whole podcast.
Right. That's what I'm saying. It's
talking
been
about,
such a theme this year.
because when you put decision making in it and you put pressure in it, that's when you see people crack. That's when you see people make bad decisions. That's when you see people make bad throws because they're second guessing themselves on what they need to do.
Yep.
And when you have a course like this, again, it kind of goes back to what Jonah was saying, is like, if that's what disc golf is, I'm not arguing at all. Like, if that's what everyone wants to see, but essentially you are playing darts or you are playing mini golf, and you're just seeing who is really freaking good at that one specific skill. Yeah. And this week, it was very clear that Isaac Robinson is the best in the world when it comes to hitting gaps with a backhand and putting.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see. I mean, moving forward, I don't know what they'll do. They seem pretty set on WR, but we'll get to the other reason here in a second why they might not need to be set on WR.
Oh boy.
But it's so off-brand for the rest of the tour. Just does not play like this. It's not such a all gas, no brakes. That's like not. I mean, if you think about the courses we've been playing so far this year, not even remotely has that been the brand of disc golf we've seen. There's been so many more opportunities for collapses. And I really do think the best courses and the most entertaining courses are going to be ones where you can shoot a 6 under par or a 6 over par. And that is it's just the difference between being on or off that day. I don't know. We'll see. But
Last thing I would just say of whether or not if it's too soft, because I know that was kind of the question, I guess, at the end of the day, right? WR Jackson's a very, very difficult course.
yeah.
If you're off. If you're not playing well, trust me, hitting first available multiple times in a round will show you how hard that course is. The problem is if you are getting off the tee well, that course is really easy.
Right. Yeah. If you get off
And
the tee on
that's-
that course, it's not hard at all.
And so that's the difficult is like, I don't want people to think that I think WR Jackson's super easy because obviously it was very tough for me this week.
Yeah, were
But-
there any par fives? I think there was like one or
There's
only
one-
there were less
12.
there were
There's
less
one-
par fives this year than there were last year. So like there's
Well,
Because 18
there was only
one
2
last
par
year.
5s last year.
There's
and
never been a lot.
They
I
actually
think
made that hole harder.
I think it comes down to green protection a lot too. Because like you said, Brody, like when you get off the tee on that course, it's so straightforward, and that's why scrambling is so straightforward. Because when you're chucking it out of the woods, you're not worried about anything up near the green. You're just getting it up there. But anyways, we're gonna move on to. Regardless of how the course plays, there's a secondary issue with WR Jackson. And this one is probably more serious, actually, definitely more serious, because you can make changes to the course pretty easily, put up some rope, right? Live coverage this year was very bad, very spotty. Last year, I remember thinking to myself, this isn't quite the best. It's getting spotty at times. This year, it was really tough. Like shots that were just being missed entirely, just the screen going completely blurry, so spotty. Now we know that WR Jackson, this is a location thing, right? They're in the woods and they're kind of, out of the way, and they depend on, cell towers essentially. They are depending on just what kind of coverage they can get to put up the best live coverage. And so we know that's the main problem here. Does such an issue warrant a dramatic change immediately, or is the prestige of the course more important than some blurry images? What kind of solutions do you guys propose? I don't know. This is an interesting one. There's a lot of backlash. Jonah, what do you think?
Yeah, I think part of the blame needs to be taken away from the courses, regardless of what it is. Because I mean, we had the same issue at Northwood Black, and at Nevin last year a little bit. We had a little bit of an issue. But I think that's I think people don't realize that how much of the blame needs to be put on DGN in this situation, because they're not a top tier production company yet. They don't have the big funding that a CBS or a Fox or a NBC does. And because of that, they don't have the capacity to stream things via satellite, from a production van, off the property. And so I think, Trevor, in your interview with Brian Earhart on your show, he talked about having some of these antiquated switching board thing. He had to go to phone on one thing and then go to a Google thing on something else. And that's we should not be having, reporters on the ground having to do that all on their own. There should be, some guys, in a van, you see it all the time, in the production room, they'll pay into the production rooms oh, thank you guys for all of the work you do. It's because it's a real job and it requires a lot of skill. And I don't think the DGN is investing in that quite yet. I think the product's good enough now to where they don't need it yet. But I think if we want to keep courses like Jackson, like Northwood Black in the picture, and I think the PDGA and the Pro Tour, that's their ideal goal is to do that, then it's going to be a factor. And then aside from that, spotty coverage is kind of in the eye of the beholder. If you ask someone who's in favor of live coverage how they feel, it's the best we got in back and forth shots of players on the chase card winning all these events, for 4 weeks in a row, there were chase card events. It's going to be their point there. Then those who swear by post-produce says Jomez Pro is going to have the highest quality production possible. But now it's coming out almost 24 hours after the MPO lead card tees off. So I think for the spotty coverage specifically, it's hit or miss right now in terms of the courses. But do we move it away from WR Jackson just because of that? I think it's a factor, but not the only thing that we consider.
Okay, Steven, what do you think?
Yeah, I got a lot to say about this. The coverage was obviously spotty. And I am a huge proponent of live disc golf, and I would think that if you ask Johnny V or his production person Mo, that they would say it's not necessarily the people that are the issue or having the expertise in the van that's the problem. It's the technology and the funding that the disc golf has at this present moment for these types of courses. Obviously, golf courses have, for the most part, put together locations that have the infrastructure needed to broadcast with their $1 million cameras. Disc golf at this point in time is not there. However, if we don't see a difference at some point with WR Jackson, the sport's going to pass that location by, and ultimately that course is not going to be able to hold a major in the future. I think that disc golf itself will remain a niche sport, unless they're able to put on events and major championships that feel like majors, and not having a clear picture for your live broadcast is not a good production, and you can't put that out there or market it. Imagine trying to market some of Isaac's amazing shots without the ability to pull post-produced coverage. You look at post-produced coverage of this course, and the course is immaculate. It's a beautiful woods course. It's the pride of the PDGA, the IDGC, and when you see it on live coverage, it's a 1972 video game. It's just not something that you want to put out there as a major, so to speak. I think ultimately, how to fix it, technology goes a long way, funding goes a long way. Is there an option for that immediate post-produced style of release for this event? Disc Golf Pro Tour and DGN might have to think about that if they want to keep it at this course.
Yeah, I would say certainly some kind of change. Brody, what do you think?
Dang. That'd be a fascinating turn of events. There's like no live, just post. There would be actually spoilers of people posting on their Instagram story who won and stuff. I mean, I think change needs to happen. Now, does that mean like completely removing the course? I don't know about that. I think there are other things that can definitely happen, but again, a lot of those are resources and funding that currently the Disc Golf Network doesn't have. The cell service out there is really bad, and I don't know if they are telling people too on the grounds like they have at other tournaments, like, hey, don't use your phones. Maybe they go that route. Maybe they go the route of like, hey, if you want to come watch live, you need to put your phone in a plastic bag and put it in a locker and not be able to use your phone, because we need every single ounce of cell reception out here. I mean, that's a drastic change, but maybe that's what they needed to do. I mean, the thing is like something does have to happen. I don't know. I don't have the answers. I don't know exactly the technology and stuff behind it. I know a lot of people, you guys were talking about golf courses and tournaments and stuff. They lay down like miles and miles and miles of cable, right? So they're not using wireless stuff with their cameras to the production trucks. It's all cable stuff, and that's really expensive. So I don't think that's a solution. But I don't know, man. I'll leave it with this. One of the few times I was able to watch live this week, I tuned in. It was commercials, and I guess it was commercials for like a long time. And then it came back to coverage, or it came back to Terry and Nate in the booth. And they're like, hey, sorry that you guys just had to watch 15 minutes of commercials, but we should have this figured out. And the good news is from the now on until the end of the day, you don't have to watch any more. And it just went to black again. And I was like, oh gosh, I feel so bad. Because again, I am a huge I'm a big live guy. Obviously, I love watching live sports. But there is a part of me that if I did tune into a fight or a football game or something that I wanted to watch on my phone, and it was blurry as heck and super blacked out, I might tune off. I might just be like, I don't want to watch this. This is, so right. I don't know.
Robbie, what do you think?
Yeah. From a viewer perspective, I mean, everyone said, like, if we could just get $1 billion to up their production, like, we just solve it all. We can go wherever we want. It'll be great. We'll put Masters Cup back on tour. We'll we'll
Wait,
do it all.
wait,
Yeah,
wait.
because
I don't think that's
obviously-
why Masters Cup's not on tour.
yeah, but like cell reception is so big for all of it, and I think it's a perspective that no one talked about is that the spotty coverage doesn't just affect the viewer from the standpoint that we can't see the shots, but y'all even mentioned it in a Foundation podcast or the live stream. You can tell that the broadcasters are looking at the same feed that we're looking at because half the time they throw the shot and then we already hate the obnoxious, like the disc leaves the air. Oh, Brian, what happened to it? Brian, you got to look at it. It's behind the basket right now, Brian. Brian, can you see it down there? Nate, are you running down there? Can you see it? And like, that wasn't obnoxious at that point. That was needed because they
Yeah.
couldn't tell. Like, we're like, is that a tree? Is that a leaf? Is that is there a Play-Doh flying around? I don't know. And so it just made it really tough to watch. And if a major, once again, is supposed to be like, let's sell this as you want to see one of the most dominant performances that someone's ever seen in disc golf, like at a major, our big event. Here, let me go show you the shots. There is absolutely no point that I'm ever going to show them that live product. And the live product only looked worse because of the fact that they were like, the commercial is standing there looking pixel perfect.
Yeah.
And then we're doing these split screens, and you're like, did like Nate's kid, like, is he practicing art for like his future child? And that's what we've thrown on the screen. Like, there were so many decisions made. I know Brody said, like, we don't have to have the professionals in the booth and whatnot, but like, someone is mixing that show, and at multiple points, they said, this is good. Like, this is what we should keep doing. We should keep putting these side by side. Just don't. Like, that's the issue. Don't.
Yeah, well, so here's my thing. My thing is, it all depends on how much that the disc golf tour, the pro tour, is going to prioritize DGN. If that is their wagon, if that is what they are going to get their funding from and their ultimate objective, then you cannot, needs to be priority number one. Needs to be live coverage. And if that's the case, like some of you mentioned, like, well, this is the best we have right now, but it's not. If you go back to certain venues, the live coverage is almost crystal clear, like pretty much perfect. So the point is that live coverage, if the right venue is selected, can be completely acceptable, pretty darn good for what they're doing. So them deciding to bottleneck themselves for the sake of a course should never happen, ever, if they care about live coverage, if that's what they care about. And I don't think that, you know, and it's tough when you decide, like, the problem is that from day one, when they decided we're going to make this the WR Jackson major, they should have gone there, tested things, decided it wasn't good enough, and they're out of there. They should have never started it from the get-go. Like, that's the problem. And then after year one, they should have scratched it right away. Like, the more they're going to continue to dig themselves into a hole, because guess what? That funding, it might not come for a long time. And you cannot sacrifice a major. In my opinion, if you care about the live coverage of the Pro Tour, you just have to put your foot down. There has to be priority. Brody.
I have a solution.
Robbie. Anybody. What?
Oh, go ahead, Robbie. But I have a solution to the problem.
Can we have comment section debate night for a question of Jonah, I think, mentioned this, that IDGC is the crown jewel of the PDGA.
That was me.
Yeah, that was Steven. Yeah.
Steven, sorry to give your credit away. So comment section, please debate us. Have your own version of debate night. Is it the PDGA strong arming this because this is their crown jewel, having them hold it there? And if so, like, how many more decisions have to be made until the Pro Tour?
I mean, it was gonna be at Toboggan, like,
yeah, no, the PDGA,
this year, right? It was supposed to be at Toboggan this year, but then
PDGA plays
PDGA moved it back after backlash saying, "Oh, we want it at WR Jackson again."
Yeah, there's a part there. Brady, what's your solution?
All right, solution.
Game on.
You have everyone sign NDAs. All spectators, all competitors, everyone sign NDAs. You don't tell anyone outside that you're doing this. We all get there the Sunday. We all get there the Sunday before the tournament, and the Sunday before the tournament starts, but no one knows. And they film it Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and they release it live,
like as if it's live.
Thursday, Friday, Saturday,
the product
Sunday.
would be too good. People would would expect too much greatness.
And no one has any idea that
They'd be
it's
like,
actually
man,
not live.
when did they start doing shot tracers live, man? This is crazy.
Yeah.
I-
What's more expensive, all the cable or paid actors following the? Hey, do you want to be an extra in this production? We have huge crowds.
The
dude.
green
Actors
screen
are-
suit just carrying the disc through the fairway.
Bro. Yeah, it's ridiculous. And to Robbie's point, like the commentary, they could have done it with a walkie-talkie. Like they didn't even need to watch the coverage because that was basically how it was. It was just like, okay, where did that throw go? Relay that to me.
Was it literally almost every shot?
It
Oh,
was
yeah.
it was like
It was
I
a
am
lot.
not like I remember
At
last
least
year
half.
thinking like oh it got blurry a lot of times like it wasn't but like this year yeah it was like almost every shot you were losing sight of things because of the blurriness.
Yeah, because at that point you're basically just listening to like an audio broadcast.
Yeah, it was
And it was-
bad and
It
like
was tough because like they'd be clear on the tee, and you're like, oh, all right, cool. And then it was the same thing as if like someone throws a shot for their first time on camera, and then they turn
Yeah.
and block the shot, and you're like,
it
I
was
have no
tough,
idea what's
man.
happening.
And then they were having to prioritize other like camera angles that weren't the best angles because they were less blurry and yeah, it was a mess.
Well, so I think just really quick to that is you see this sometimes when you're trying to broadcast anything live from your phone. And when you're standing still and everything's pretty much still in front of you, it's a really nice and clear picture. But when there's movement, the way
Mhm.
that the system processes that movement and the lack of signal, it creates chaos in the system.
Standstill throws only. Problem
Yeah,
solved.
it was quite apparent. I think they got to do something drastic or they got to get out of there.
Joe Mess took a big win.
Yeah, big win for Jomez especially because they didn't have a chase card winner. Points update going into our final main subject here. Rody at 6, Robbie and Steven at 8, and Jonah at 5. Last thing, I'm going to talk a little bit more about Isaac Robinson because, he's an interesting player to think about right now. We kind of lost sight of him a little bit. He had obviously a dominant win last year at Idlewild. Isaac Robinson looks simply unstoppable out there on his way to victory. What makes him so great in the woods? And should we be calling him the new Chris Dickerson? Also, is his game applicable to the open courses or will his success be bound to the woods? Because it kind of has been that way so far. I mean, at least his 2 wins. Steven, lead off for us.
I have been holding this in all podcast.
Okay.
So Isaac Robinson, everyone's talking about how he's the guy in the woods and he had every single shot. He only hit the fairway 67% of the time, which was 64th in the field. I was shocked when I saw this number.
Wow.
He has not been better than 9th in fairway hits this entire season. His ability to scramble and hit gaps and putt is what won him this tournament. Okay, that's first off. And now, as far as his game being applicable outside in open courses, or is he the new Chris Dickerson? Is he the god of the woods? Until he shows me differently, his success is completely random and is not limited to the woods. It's sporadic. If you look back at his finishes going back to last season, he got 3rd at Portland, not really a woods course there, and then 36th at Beaver. He won Idlewild, but then he took 42nd at Deglow and 43rd at Ledgestone. He needs to show consistency before we put him on any type of a pedestal.
Yeah. Okay. Fair points. Crazy stat there. Did not know that. That's interesting. Brody, do you have anything to kind of counter that? I don't know that you can
Yeah.
really.
Yeah, I'll counter that by saying that stat's incorrect. What the heck? Mainly
How?
just because fairway hits is one of the worst stats for a volunteer to have to decide whether or not
That is
they're in the
true.
fairway.
That is true. I'd like
It's
to know
literally-
what some of those fairway hits look
It's
like.
literally one of the worst stats ever of where they're like, oh, I think they're not in the fairway. A lot easier to do when there's OB and you're not an OB, so you're in the fairway. I'll say this about Isaac because I got the chance obviously to play with him before the tournament here, and I also got the chance to play with him when he won in Idlewild. I think the 3rd round, or no, it wasn't the final round. Sorry, the 2nd round. I think actually out at Idlewild, and I even played with him. I think, or at least I got to see him play a little bit in person at Portland. When he's a live and die by the putt.
Mhm.
That's what he is. He's very, very consistent off the tee for the majority of the times I've played with him. He's not like shanking shots and like just doesn't have it. He's very consistent off the tee. He doesn't have great distance. So that Portland Open, he's a little bit more of a disadvantage there just because there is more distance involved versus a course like WR Jackson where distance is almost completely eliminated. But he's a live and die by the putt. If his putt is on, he is going to be competing at the top. If his putt is off, the way he putts, he is going to be putting himself in a lot of positions to not just not make the 60-foot birdies and stuff, but now miss the comeback just with the style of kind of putting he has. So I think he is more, and we've seen this with maybe a few guys in the past of where when they start putting really incredible, it's like it almost seems, we've seen it with Gannon Burr too. When his putting is on, it almost seems like it doesn't really matter what he does off the tee. As long as he gets within 70 feet of the basket, it's fine. And that's kind of Isaac's game right now, is he is that good at putting that when he is on, there might not be a better putter in the game. And the way that disc golf is currently set up with how important putting is and how putting can really, bandage a lot of wounds, that's where we see him excel at, W.R. Jackson. His putting was phenomenal. And then Idlewild, obviously, when he won that tournament as well, his putting was ridiculous. I mean, when I played with him, he didn't miss a putt inside of like 70 feet that whole round.
Yeah,
so
he can be automatic. The way that putter can jump out of his hand is insane. It looks effortless.
I can't wait until other people try to like mimic his putt.
Oh, it's not the putt to mimic. Robbie, Robbie can attest, I'm sure.
It's such a hard putt.
Yeah, his hands like
the
flying away from the
handshake
basket.
moves, like-
Oh. Yeah, very anti-handshake putt.
It's very similar though. If you break it down though, it is actually kind of similar. It's not as herky. It's a little more herky jerky, but it's kind of that similar vibe that Eagle has.
Yes.
Of where it's like
it's just like
he
a
just
recoil and spin type
spin,
putt.
and then he doesn't extend his arm all the way. It's the thing of beauty though.
Right.
Yeah, it's just a putter. Yeah. Robbie, what did you think about Isaac's game?
Yeah, I think obviously super dominant, crushed it. Making sure I get the do I think he's the new Chris Dickerson? No. I think that he's still getting out there, making his name. Like Chris has been a dominant force for a long time. So I know that we want to push this narrative of future disc golf of, hey, this person's going to be like so great. The sport is now watching Gannon. All right, next weekend Gannon didn't play great, so the sport is now watching Isaac. I think that we're trying to chase narratives really fast instead of just letting them play out. And then also to the whole fairway hits. Another thing about fairway hits is that if you're not in circle in regulation, you technically have missed the fairway. So that statistic that's literally how it works. If you're not in the circle in a certain amount of strokes,
Robbie, for par three.
Well, and then it carries on for par fours as well. Like if you're not within in a certain place, but I mean, his strokes gained tee to green, he led the field. Strokes gained in putting was interesting because he's actually, I think, 17th, if I'm doing my counting right.
Yeah, he lost strokes gained putting this weekend.
Yep. So I think that like super interesting in terms of his like performance and that right. But I agree with Brody. Like I think that if his putt is on, he's great. But if you're good in the woods and he has the distance, I'm not seeing why people are doubting him out in the open. Like it's just time.
He doesn't have the distance.
Great.
He doesn't have elite distance. He has.
He doesn't have elite distance.
It's definitely not going to give him an advantage.
He plays 9th at Music City.
That wasn't a distance required course. Think about how many holes that I was having to throw multiple long shots, Robbie. It's like that. And here's the other thing too, that when it comes to like distance, I guess also, and this is a big one, is there are people like Mason Ford, you wouldn't think is like elite level distance, right? But if you put him out in a field and he can hyzer flip a disc, it will go far enough to where he's fine. The problem is when now he's playing into a 20-mile-an-hour headwind. You've got Eagle, you got AB, you got Double G, you got those guys that are now going, Calvin, they're going to their most overstable disc and they're just ripping it through the headwind, no problem. When you have guys that have that more hyzer flip kind of touchy distance, when you get into the wind, it gets really, really difficult for them in a hurry. Because now if they went to a super overstable disc, now they're only getting 350, 360 off the tee. So I think that is one of the things. But that's also something that can be learned over time. And I could see him, he's still like a young guy. He's not a super old guy. I could see him kind of developing a little bit more of a power game too when you get out in the open.
I also said, let the record show, Mr. Moderator, that literally all three people talked during my time.
That is
just
true.
saying.
I will give you an extra point for that. So, just
I
'cause
don't.
you-
I still don't get the strokes gain thing because the time
I-
I watched him, he didn't
all of the
seem like he was
stats that I'm
putting
hearing right
bad.
now are all shocking me. I didn't really deep dive into them. We've said it once, we've said it a million times. Stat keeping is flawed for two reasons. Number one, there's a lot of imperfect stats, like circle two putting, for example, incredibly imperfect stat because how far was that putt? And
Especially
then
in the
number
woods.
two, they're all volunteer kept. So like fairways hit can be a misleading stat, especially at a course where it's ambiguous. Because like, I mean, and it's not even like, even if you were a professional scorekeeper, it would still be ambiguous to some extent. I mean,
Sure, but I think when you're 64th, there
But
you can take away 30 spots for ambiguous.
what's
and
the
still-
difference though between like a few percentage points from 64th to like top 20?
That's a good question
curious.
there, Trevor.
That's where, because like the
good
two
question.
fairway hits that he was just taken away from him for no reason. I don't know. Stat keeping scares me. It scares me. I think it needs to continue to evolve before because like so far, every time I look for a narrative in stats, I get lost. Jonah, Isaac
Alrighty.
Robinson.
As per usual, I have a lot of ground to make up, so let's do this thing. So I think what makes him so special and such an awesome woods player is, and I'll touch on the distance in a second, but his late flight angle control, wing angle control is second to none out there. I think it's so special, like watching him throw the disc, because the way he can control, especially like a left to right shaping shot with the backhand, and it comes in like as if it's a forehand, the way it's shaping the air, like it comes in on the same hook, but it's a backhand, so it's turning to the right, of course. And it comes to the ground so soft that it has barely any ground play. I forget what hole it was on. I guess on the par four, I think it's hole 5 where it like bends to the right first and then go back to the left in that open shot. His backhand on that tee shot is so unique. It doesn't burn over, but it still has enough turn to just keep it moving right the whole time. And I think that's something that I haven't really seen another player do with a backhand. Even James Conrad, because he has more of a floaty turnover. I think that's something that he can do so expertly, and is why he's such a dangerous player in the woods, because a lot of times those backhand shots are needed. And then like everyone said, when his putting was on, he's going to play super well. I think the reason why he was so successful at the Tour Championship last year was because of those two things. And what held him back was on 18, he just couldn't outdrive Rick. I mean, that's bottom line. Like he had to lay up basically on the tee shot, where Ricky got like maybe an extra 60, 70 feet of distance and was able to birdie 2 times in a row, whereas Isaac had to lay up for par twice in a row, more or less. So granted, Nevin's a different course, but same idea applies. And then let's see what else I have here. Yeah, I mean, absolutely his skills are translatable in terms of being at open courses. Like everyone said so far, I think everybody touched on it at least. His Portland Open play, that's where his putt was kind of like unstoppable and kind of had a breakout performance there. And that's kind of what I think that no matter where you go, putting is going to be, such a useful skill. And I think if he can find that consistency with it, from event to event, he's going to be, super dominant player. And I think something else that comes to mind is like this course did not have any elevated baskets that I can think of.
Nope.
Yeah, I don't think any. So I think that something like with his putt specifically, like if there are sketchy greens or greens with OB close behind, that his putt is kind of volatile in that sense. And he can definitely make a push either to like be really on the stripe and be hitting them. Like at Idlewild, I think there's maybe only one elevated basket, maybe 2 out there. And the same thing for Nevin. I think there's only like maybe 4 instead of the 6 or 7 or 8 we see normally on a tour event. And then in terms of him being the new Chris Dickerson, I think he has his own game enough to where you can make them super different, specifically with their putting styles. Chris has like the least spin out of the top competitors' putts that I can think of, and Isaac maybe has the most next to Gannon Burr in terms of the putting style. And then Chris definitely has a more developed forehand than Isaac does. I mean, that's pretty obvious. I don't really know where Chris finished this weekend, but I mean,
yeah, top 10.
Okay, so yeah, so there you go. But how many strokes was that? Was it?
Well,
I think it was
everyone lost by a lot of
yeah.
strokes.
Yeah, it was like at least 10 that I can think
Yeah,
of.
everybody
so.
got crushed.
Oh, you
Yeah,
got
that's-
11.
it's kind of-
you
yeah,
tied
but-
for 11th.
Okay, so
Lost by
that was like
13.
right. So 13 strokes. That's a lot. I mean, every course is going to be a little different. Course that requires more forehands, Chris will probably play better. So I think that they're different enough to have their own games, and Isaac's he's dangerous every tournament east of the Mississippi.
Yeah, he's a dangerous player. I will say I do agree. Like the one shot that I do feel like he had like really dialed down that I think was the most important shot to have at that course was that turnover you were mentioning where the drivers were just kind of panning to the right and then landing flat. That shot seemed to be like the most important one at that course. He was just absolutely dialed with it. I mean, there's so many of those where you had to kind of, and especially when you're landing on like the pine straw, it is kind of important to control that ground play.
Quick stat, because I looked it up. He missed 6 putts from circle 2 and missed 2 putts inside the circle all week. And you also have to take into account circle 2. A lot of those greens can have trees in the way and other things to where you might not even have a really good putt at it. From there, I did not get to see all his coverage of what those circle 2 misses look like. But that's again where you look at that and you think, oh yeah, like you said, he lost strokes to the field and putting. Did he though? Like that's
I think you got to account too that like I know during the last round I saw him lay up at least 2 putts from circle 2. He stopped.
Sure.
He kind of took his foot off the gas a little bit.
But my point being is like again, you kind of have to go a little bit deeper than just strokes gained.
Yeah,
because again,
I was just saying
like
the stats. I'm not saying it's like accurate or not.
No, I know that's the problem
says.
right now with a lot of our stats is they don't actually really tell you the story. Because if you tell me he lost strokes to the field, I'd be like, oh my gosh, he actually did putt bad. He did putt bad.
It is weird right now that disc golf is kind of an eye test situation with a lot of things. Like there are some, I mean, like circle 1 and 2 in reg, I think are pretty good stats. I think those are the ones that consistently tell me a lot event to event. Is like if you're really good circle 1 in regulation and your putting was solid, like you're probably had a good
You're probably
finish.
finishing pretty high.
Because that's pretty standard. You got in the circle in regulation. It's pretty black and white stat. But they definitely need some work. Anyways, we are now going to move on to our elimination. Brody and Jonah falling just short at 9 and 8 points today. Robbie and Steven tied at 10. We're moving
with a bad omen.
It did not work out today. I know. We're going to move on to No Hat and Prodigy Hat. Moving on to the finals. We got 3 topics here. And we got 2. The first 2 here are going to deal with Kristen Tatar because I think we need to talk a little bit more about Kristen, just how dominant she's been so far. So let's move into our rapid fire round. All right, Robbie, Steven, all tied up right now. So I'm thinking even number between 1 and 10. Steven.
You said an even number?
Just a number.
Oh, a number. 5.
Robbie?
6.
It's 6 again. It's been 6 every single time.
Nice.
But
You
one of
gotta
these
pay
times I'm
attention.
going to
You gotta
switch
pay
it.
attention.
See, here's the thing, though, Steven. I was the closest I've ever been today to switching it. In my mind, I was like, I'm going to keep it going.
But honestly, statistically, taking 6 is still a great play.
statistically, it is a good number. Robbie, which would you like to go first or second?
Bro, I want the box, baby.
Okay, going first.
Give me the box.
First question. Would the FPO division, we saw a leaderboard today, and to be fair, the same thing happened in MPO this past weekend, but it happens in FPO more, where you take Kristen away, and man, that leaderboard would have been sure exciting to look at. So would the FPO division be better off without Kristen Tatar from a viewership standpoint? It seems like right now nobody can stand in her way. She's not being challenged a ton. Maybe that's recency bias, but Robbie, what do you think?
Yeah. Would golf have been better without Tiger? Would the NPO have been better without Paul? No, but like seriously, I think that it absolutely gives people a standard to live up to and to play up to. There were 2 stats that you just said are super important that we can actually lean on: circle 1 in reg, circle 2 in reg. And guess who didn't lead either of those categories? It was Kristen. Evelina Salonen led in both of those categories.
Wow.
But 50% putting didn't help her out. So what I think is super fascinating is that Kristen plays extremely well. She plays extremely clean. And what it's challenging other players to do is to get to the same level of birdies that she's getting while eliminating the bogeys. They're having to learn course management while upping their game, and they're having to learn how to putt, which is something that we see why Kristen is as dominant as she is because she just makes putts. How many times do we see these FPO players stand up, they're looking at the basket, and we're like, oh, they got this. Why? Like, quack it right into the basket. And like, that's a bummer to watch from a professional standpoint, but there's a reason that when Kristen misses putts from 25, 30 feet, we're shocked. There's a reason when we watch MPO players miss putts from 25 and 35 feet that we're shocked. We don't feel that in FPO, and until the bar meets Kristen, I think it's fantastic for them to sit there and watch her get that mojo going on the card.
Yeah, certainly. Steven?
Yeah. So, would FPO be much more dramatic and exciting and more parody driven without Kristen? Yes. Would it be better for the sport or even from a viewership standpoint without her? No. Honestly, I think that, the only thing that people like more than that dominant force that is, the Tigers or the LeBrons or the Kobe's or the, whoever you want to throw out there is they like to see the big dog fall. Everyone loves to root for an underdog. And so what I think is going to happen is we're going to see Kristen Tatar continue to dominate. But the moment that we see a player start to rise to the occasion and truly start to consistently challenge her, the storylines in disc golf and for FPO are going to dominate. And you're going to see everybody start to rally behind the underdog trying to take down Kristen. And it's going to be the most entertaining disc golf we get to watch from an FPO perspective for years.
Yeah, that is fair. It sets up that way. I do think that's interesting though, because like if you go back to the Tiger era, if that's like the example, right? And Kristen's not to that level yet, but she could well be on her way. When Tiger Woods was in his heyday, people didn't want Tiger to lose. That was the interesting thing is nobody wanted. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but people wanted Tiger to win all the time. Like when somebody would rise up against him, Anthony Kim is like a good example. I remember in a certain event, he was like, people didn't want Tiger to lose. So I wonder, like, will Kristen, and I think the effect is good either way. Like if Kristen becomes so beloved that people are just every week is just like, oh my goodness, let's root hard for Kristen so she doesn't lose. Like that's what we want to keep going. Or does the person who kind of moves up to challenge her, does that person gain following? I think it's interesting how that develops because I feel like, I don't know. And I'm sure there was a lot of people out there that disliked Tiger. It was just, the loud majority wanted him to win.
Well, it creates division within the fan bases.
Yeah.
And that's what creates drama and that's what creates good live sports.
Yeah, very true. Very true. It's going to be something interesting to watch. And, there's some recency bias. We've seen drama just this year already in other events. We've seen Kristen lose.
Sure.
It's just like currently the way the tide is flowing, it seems like, man, will Kristen even lose ever again? But, I'm sure we'll be back next week and be like, oh my goodness, Kristen lost. So, but speaking on that, by the way, Robbie now up 13-12 on Steven, heading into our second topic. Steven will lead off here. Kristen Tatar is creeping very close to the 1,000 rated mark right now. She's getting there. This is something we talked about kind of during COVID. Paige was getting close. She became like the highest rated female ever, and it started to become this narrative. Now, since then, ratings you've been thrust out of the limelight. They're almost never talked about anymore. We try to encourage that, but it would be a big deal. I like to think like it would be mentioned if she hit 1,000 rated at the very least. Even though they're not considered very important more, is there any significance to this if she makes it to 1,000? Steven, what do you think?
So I understand and I kind of agree that ratings they're just a number. We talked about it even before the show. My rating is in the toilet, but it's because I've played like one event and I didn't play well at that event,
Right.
So I don't really take too much into account when it comes to ratings. However, I do think it's significant. I absolutely think it shows the growth and talent in the FPO division when you can see that FPO player finally get over that mark. It has been a talking point for years, and I think that when you see that happen, or hopefully we do, but when you see it happen, if it is Kristen, Latitude is going to put out a stupid amount of 1,000 rated discs. and they won't be, ironic discs. It'll be something that they are proud of, that she is proud of, and it's going to be used as a measuring stick moving forward, for the FPO division. And so while ratings, in my opinion, and in, a lot of people's consensus opinion, aren't really a thing, it is significant, and people will pay attention when she hits that mark.
Yeah, I think people will pay attention for sure. Robbie, what do you think about that?
So I think that the most important thing to talk about here is the exact word Steven used, which is measuring stick. How often when we talk about ratings, we say for the pros, it doesn't matter. For the pros, it doesn't matter. But for AMs, ratings are really good because AMs, you can use it to say where you play. You can say, hey, I play this course in SoCal, whereas I'm playing this Woods course over in Alabama, and the rating actually determines, should give us a fair feel of how the courses carry over. My thing with Kristen hitting, why it's significant, is because I think her hitting 1,000 rated, being the first player to ever do it, cements her in disc golf history. First off, that's incredible. So what a way to add establishment to and establish something cool in her career. The second is it brings validity in measurement to FPO, because suddenly we can also, to all the haters that are out here just trash talking FPO constantly, man, put my MA3 player out there and they're just going to crush them. We get 1,000 rated player who's out there, has actually earned this rating, and suddenly there's significance to what the women are doing out there. I think it brings an appreciation for what they're doing. I think it adds validity, and it takes, love it or leave it, ratings still exist. And until someone tries to create a different system, we have to honor the system that we have in front of us. So saying that Kristen hitting 1,000 rated is insignificant is disgracing what we've used as a measuring stick for the entire time. So Kristen hitting 1,000 rated is monumental for the success of the sport.
I would, I agree. I don't know. I think that might be a little dramatic. I would only say that just because I think that, and FPO ratings are a little inflated in my opinion. And I say that because I've looked at the data before, course to course. It's something that we've talked about on our show before. I think they're a little inflated. Now, that doesn't really, it doesn't really matter that much, but I think that the rating system, I don't know, it's flawed. I think it's significant in the way that Steven mentioned. And yes, it is going to be, people are going to pay attention. It will be made a big deal by Latitude. There will be a lot of discs made. And to Robbie, to your point, it will cement her in history. She will be the first 1,000 rated woman. That will be, for as long as ratings are relevant, that will be a thing that's talked about. But I don't know. I have to be careful because I don't want that. I think the reason why, if we talk it up a little too much, I think it almost, the way that it would be insignificant, the way I kind of wrote this question was not in the sense that it's not an accomplishment, but in the sense that if she's winning all these tournaments, why is anybody caring about the rating? It's like what really matters? Because Kristen doesn't care for ratings 800 if she's winning every single event. She is the top of the FPO field, and I see the idea of
comparison
and having that, to the AMs, it'll probably have a lot of validity because they do, almost worship ratings to some extent. So seeing that somebody is above that 1,000 mark, that will help. I don't know. It's a weird one. I think it's going to be the first thing to bring ratings talk. If it happens, it'll bring ratings back into the limelight again, and everybody will get to talk about them and why they're right or wrong and this and that. So that'll be interesting at the very least, because we've had this period of peace and no war amongst the ratings thing for a while because there's been no reason to talk about it.
I'm sure I'll lose on the salt of it, but I'm just saying it's interesting that there's only one person on this call who's 1,000 rated. And in the conversation of trying to talk about another player accomplishing it, we're diminishing it. So I'm fine losing on that platform.
Listen, I've just seen the rating system abused too much. I mean, what was it last year? We had a person who was number 2 in the world according to their rating, and they played one tournament. So there's been too many.
That's my thing. Is I think that I understand you can manipulate the system, but how is she, if she's playing fair and she's doing what she's supposed to do? How is she manipulating the system? She's leaning into the system.
She's not manipulating. She's not manipulating the system, but the system might be broken. That's the whole argument of ratings is and because FPO
I'll
is
play
playing in a
trap. It's
they're
fine.
playing
I
in a
get it.
bubble.
As the
FPO is
guy who
playing.
actually pays attention to AMs and viewers, I'll play into your trap. That's fine.
FPO is playing into a bubble, and MPO is playing in a bubble. So I don't think that their ratings are going to correlate very much. And I've seen examples before of FPOs playing on MPO courses or same. There's reason to believe that FPO ratings have been inflated, and that's all I'm going to say on that matter. Anyways, on to the last topic. Thus far into the season, this is kind of a jump away from. This is kind of just a bonus subject. It's something we haven't talked about a lot this year, though. I feel like a lot of times we talk about signings more, and we haven't really brushed on it much. So, Robbie, you'll lead off with this one. Thus far into the season, who is proving to be the best new signing or extended player? I'll go ahead and add that one in there since there wasn't, a ton of signings of the previous offseason. Who so far looks like the best deal made, Robbie?
I think the obvious answer is a man who is from Shrewsbury, Massachusetts, and at least that's where it says he's from. I mean, how are you arguing literally anyone but Simon Lizotte? The man has made the Hex difficult to find as a retailer. How are you going to tell me that the signing of Simon Lizotte has not had a tremendous impact on your ability to sell and move discs? All right, so Kristen's fake 1,000 rating that she's about to get, she's going to sell 1,000. She's going to sell thousands of discs. So if that's what matters, if that's the only reason that it's significant for her to get that rating, congratulations. Simon didn't even doesn't have to do that, and he just sells discs because that's who he is. And so you can take it from the financial standpoint. Wow, what an incredible signing. You can take it from the prestige standpoint. Looking at Simon's year, he has 2 podium finishes, and at this major, he just finished 13th, which everyone got demolished in that field. So a top 15 is fantastic there. So Simon, absolutely far and away the clear winner. I just don't understand how you can argue the significance of literally anyone else.
There's a few other people that are significant. I don't know, Steven, you want to bring somebody else to the table?
It's tough because I had Simon. This is why I wanted to go first, because I wanted to go first on this question because Simon is the obvious answer, right? The hype for MVP that he has brought to them as an MVP main thrower. I throw MVP, and MVP is becoming harder and harder to find for the discs that I want because of Simon, and it's just showing the gravitas that he brings to that manufacturer. Now, I'm going to shout out somebody not from this past offseason, and I know this isn't the question, but I'm going to throw it back to the previous offseason and say Latitude 64 killed it by signing Kristen to a 4-year deal, right? And so while it wasn't an extension, they continued that on. Now, Brody also re-signed with Discraft, so you got to give that to them because he also sells discs. That's what Brody does. Brody is a huge disc mover for Discraft, and by re-signing him with Foundation, you got yourself a gem there. Now, yeah, I don't really have anybody else. I'm curious to see what Trevor is going to throw in here and how Robbie takes the win. Because
no, I actually have
answer.
Calvin Heinberg was the other answer.
Calvin Heinberg was the other answer.
An extension.
Yeah, okay.
I think
he got the bag. He was ready to go. Got to do your research, Steven. Come on, my guy.
I think you guys should be tied right now, and I have a tiebreaker that I want to be the final thing for the show. Steven, what do you think about the rating system? Give me an inkling into what you think. Just a short, do you like it or do you not like it?
Robbie is so much.
This is what the tiebreaker. The tiebreaker is going to be. Each of you have 30 seconds to give me your pitch as to why the rating system is either accurate or inaccurate. I didn't say good or bad. Accurate or inaccurate. Robbie, you can lead off, and Steven, I'll give you time to collect your thoughts. I know Robbie.
I'll let him lead off. I've gone.
If you're ready to rock, Steven, go for it.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's do
it. Go for it, Steven.
I'll take the box. All right. So I think that it's inaccurate. The reason that I think it's inaccurate is because it's going to change from course to course depending on who's in the field. If you have high rated players in the course, you're going to see higher rated rounds from those players if there's separation between them and the lower half of the field. And so because of that, the field dictating what that rating is going to be for that course, I don't like it.
Robbie?
It's inaccurate, and it's not because of the propagators in the field like Steven's referring to. It's inaccurate because of the emphasis placed on OB. You look at Memorial. That's why Memorial has all of the highest rated rounds is because of the OB that is present there. So the inaccuracy doesn't come from players' ability to necessarily just be in the field. The inaccuracy comes because there's so much extra weight added per stroke, and those strokes are ripped away via the OB.
Interesting argument. I emphasize with both sides. I emphasize with Steven a lot because I played college disc golf. And if you've ever played college disc golf, you understand that good ratings cannot be achieved because we play in a bubble of college disc golf. Most of the events we play all year are college events. And so when you're trapped in a bubble, the ratings can only get so high at a time. They can only go up very incrementally. When you're playing in the FPO bubble, for example, those ratings are kind of working in that bubble. And in the MPO field bubble, you're now working inside of that bubble. When you have these tours, that is what can happen. It's not now back in the old day, players were crisscrossing all over the place, playing local events, then tours. You had a lot of different things going. But these days, because of the tours, I feel like ratings kind of happen inside of a bubble. And that's where I sympathize with Steven a lot, is because in college disc golf, I saw some of the most ridiculous scores shot at courses and the ratings. Do you have a counterpoint to that, Robbie?
100%.
What is
the
that?
separation of the OB strokes, which is just straight strokes added. The reason your college disc golf ratings are low is not because of the highest rated people in the field. It's the lowest rated people who stay clean and don't pick up OB strokes. Your lowest rated people are the ones messing with the propagators. Once again, I'm talking, we're having a ratings debate with people
Comes
that
down to the field, though.
haven't even played more than 20 events combined between the two of them. So how are we, like, how are ratings and how the ratings work? Talk to someone who literally coaches AMPs, plays in events. Trust me, like, and actually cares about ratings and helping players, because that's a measurement that we actually use to help them see their success and see their improvement. Is, hey, you're playing consistent golf, you're improving. So do I think it's inaccurate overall? Sure. But I do think that it is the best thing we've got going. So
I see my
once
success
again,
by finishing at the top of my field.
yeah. And you know what's going to happen if you finish higher than everyone else in your field? You're going to have a better rating than them.
Yes,
For the
but if you're,
event,
so
and
high.
for the event, and in that event where everyone, find me one player in the world who says, oh, you know what? I actually think that I play my rating, besides Robbie Crawford.
yeah, okay.
Like,
Within the event, sure, ratings are accurate, but so are the scores. What's the point of the rating within the event?
because the rating gives you the overall look throughout the season. It's fine. I'm fine giving Steven the win. You know you wanted to by bringing up another ratings question.
No, I wanted to hear your argument.
It's fine.
I wanted to hear your argument, and I still just I don't know. We're gonna have to talk more about it because I believe in you, Robbie, and I know you know what you're talking about. All right, Steven is our winner today. Ratings are an incredibly tumultuous subject. If you have your saying on ratings, I know it's back and forth. I know that I have my opinion on ratings. Other people love ratings. Robbie is the man of the ratings people. So if you in the comments can want to take his side, you should take his side and
The
get
one
your
who
points
actually
across.
has used them before, unlike the rest of the people here.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I have a rating. But in any case, Steven, you're the winner today. You had a good show. Any last words before we wrap up?
Powered by Prodigy, and I know Robbie is claiming himself to be the people's champ in this one, so it's okay. I will take the win, and I will take the trophy because I feel like it may be well deserved over the course of my body of work here on the show. But thank you,
you know,
everybody.
you were due, Steven. And you know what? I will have to maybe avoid putting in subjects that are such a or I have such a bias towards, and I pretty much know what I'm going to side with ahead of time because I don't even think I realized it until I got there. But in any case, that's been another episode of what is it, Robbie?
I'm just saying I got 1 point on ratings for arguing with it. So that's, you know.
It's the Prodigy hat, baby.
It's true.
Prodigy
you ran
for
in
the dub.
You ran into my
Prodigy
ratings
with
my
Prodigy
ratings
with
hatings.
controversy. Way to go, Steve.
That's
right,
it for
That's
this
right.
episode of that's it for this episode of Debate Night. We will see you back next week. And man, help us all if Kristen hits 1,000 rated because we're bringing Robbie back on the show for that episode. I'll promise you that. We'll see you in the next one.